Thank you very much, Philip. I read with interest, actually, your letter yesterday, and I think, frankly, from a personal perspective, it's about time someone stood up and said it, really. You call the Prime Minister's push for net zero utterly futile virtue signalling. I think potentially some other people's views on this are unrepeatable at this particular time of day. Why are we doing this? Why are we pressing ahead with this to the extent where actually we know it probably won't work, we know it will probably make a lot of people poorer, and yet we hurtle on head first? Why?
Well, it's a good question. I wish I knew the answer to that question. It just seems to me that, the political class have completely lost the plot over all of this. It's a collective loss of everybody's common sense, to be perfectly honest. Look, of course, everybody, thinks, we should be greener. It sounds like a good thing to do. But when people start realising the cost of going greener and what's expected of them, I expect there to be a huge backlash to this, particularly when they realise that because of the actions of China and India and emerging economies in Africa, anything we do is going to be completely futile. We're not going to change the world's temperatures by the UK going to net zero, and that's not a matter of opinion. That's just a simple matter of fact, whether it's an inconvenient one or not.
Sure, and I completely agree with you that it obviously has to be collective because we are talking about global temperatures here, but we shouldn't be waiting for the likes of China to take the lead on this. We should be, leading the way on this agenda, should we not? And so actually it is right, even though we are 1% of global emissions, that we perhaps show other countries, other rich nations who can perhaps put pressure on those other countries that this is how it is done and this is the lead you should be following.
Yeah, and we've been doing that. We've been doing that for 30 years. I mean, over the last 30 years, we've cut our carbon emissions almost in half, by about 40%. We've been leading the way, showing the rest of the world what to do. Have the rest of the world been following us? Has China been following us? No, they're laughing at us, frankly. They're mopping up the industries that we say we no longer want, and they're relocating them to their country and spewing out the sort of carbon emissions from their country and taking all the jobs. It's not making any difference to global temperature. So we've been leading the way for 30 years. At some point, you've got to accept that these other countries are just not going to follow suit. It's just not going to happen. And so, does anybody really, China have said they're going to build 100 new airports over the next decade. So there's absolutely no prospect of them changing what they're doing. So at some point, you've got to accept that this isn't going to happen. And so if you're going to spend money on climate change, the question is, what do you do? Do you spend it on this futile attempt to change the world's temperature, which really, frankly, deep down, we all know isn't going to happen because we know that China, India, emerging economies in Africa aren't going to take the actions to cut their carbon emissions. Their increase in carbon emissions each year is going to be bigger than our total.
Yeah,
so do you do that and continue down that wasting money, or do you spend money on trying to adapt to the changes in the world's climate? And my point is, that is a much more sensible use of money, because if you spend money trying to change the world's temperature, that money will all be wasted because of the actions of other countries. But if you spend money trying to adapt to changes in the world's economy, that money could be well spent.
But let's just get this right. What you're saying there, I'm assuming that as far as you're concerned, you believe that our Prime Minister and presumably our Chancellor already know this. They know that us getting to net zero, if indeed it ever happens, at whatever cost it is, will do nothing to reduce global temperatures. And that's one of the things that I really want to get at, because we do hear a lot about Marcus Rashford's hungry children. We do hear a lot about things going on in this country that could do with a bit of a boost, especially now, in this particular moment as we emerge from the ashes of this pandemic. So really, is our government deliberately wasting money?
Well, this is a matter for the whole political class. They haven't got the courage to stand up to the sort of zealots on Twitter and social media and all of these lunatics blocking the roads and all the rest of it. They haven't got the courage to stand up to them, and that's a failure of the whole political class, in my opinion. I think everybody deep down knows that China, India, and emerging economies in Africa aren't going to take the steps that are needed. And if anyone's got any evidence that they are going down that route, let's have a look at it, because I can't see any evidence that they're going to follow suit. So, yes, you're absolutely right. That my constituents are struggling with the cost of living. They want cheaper energy bills rather than sort of greener energy. And this is sort of it's a very middle class kind of campaign. People who are not struggling to pay the bills, wanting to impose extra costs on families who can't really afford extra bills in order to make them feel virtuous. But what about people who are struggling to pay the bills? I think let's have some cheaper energy bills for people struggling with the cost of living, rather than forcing the bills up deliberately in order to be greener. I just can't justify that.
Yeah, and I think your colleague Steve Baker has also done a lot of work in that area, highlighting the cost of net zero, particularly to poorer families. But just to end, so we have all these policies, don't we? We have that commitment to going net zero by 2050. We have the banning of sale of new diesel and petrol cars, I think 2030 or 2035, whatever it is. And gas boilers as well, they're going. I'm presuming, is your issue with those policies in principle, or do you just think actually we're rushing towards them? And what policies do you think we should have, if any at all, as part of our green agenda?
Well, I think we should say to other countries around the world that we're not going to take these steps unless you do. We're not going to sort of, in effect, take one for the team in a futile gesture and just export jobs and prosperity to other countries around the world. So I think we need to play a bit more hardball. But if those other countries are not going to do those things, then we should be looking after the best interests of our constituents, and that isn't making them buy new heat pumps and things like that unnecessarily. We should say to other countries that they need to play their part, or else we're not going to do it instead. And I think that the point I would make, in the 1980s, we had people who believed in unilateral nuclear disarmament that said that, if we get rid of our nuclear weapons, every other country will follow suit. And I thought that was mad then, as did most of the public. Now we've got sort of unilateral green agenda, and it's the same principle. If we do it, everyone else will follow suit. Well, there's absolutely no evidence that all these other countries are going to follow suit. And I think the idea that they will is as unlikely now as it was about the argument for nuclear disarmament in the 1980s.
Yeah, Philip Davies, thank you very much, Tory MP for Shipley, and I also suspect on the right side of history.